This is Eating Crow with Pete Durand.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another compelling episode of the Eating Crow podcast. I am honored to host Ed Roshitsh on the call. And Ed, we've known each other about 2 years, and I've been looking forward to getting you on the show because, and I'm going to get into this, I've watched your leadership style from afar, right? My wife actually worked at your company, and she would come home and say, "You have to see this email." She goes, "I might get in trouble showing you this." But she's like, "Look at the way this guy communicates." So there's a lot there. And obviously, Ed, you've got another big thing that you've got going on in your career and personal life I think you're really passionate about. We want to get into that as well. So why don't you get our listeners up to speed on what you're doing today with Holidays for Heroes, and then we'll kind of walk our way back through your background.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be with you today. The Holidays for Heroes thing is pretty interesting. I don't know, last year, you probably remember, and maybe some of your listeners as well, I threw out a simple 5-sentence call to action ad on LinkedIn in Thanksgiving of last year. And the call to action was, hey, do you know anybody in the active duty military that can't afford maybe getting home for Christmas this year? I'll buy 5 tickets out of my own pocket and we'll send some soldiers home for Christmas or New Year's, et cetera. Well, the thing took off. It went viral. The most viral thing I've ever been associated with.
We're too old to understand what viral means, right?
Totally. And the thing took a life of its own. It ended up being on HLN, all the CBS, ABC, NBC affiliates nationwide. I was getting snapshots of TVs from Montreal. The thing just sort of took off. It struck a chord with folks. And I looked at it over the winter and was like, I think I should legitimize this and create a real 501c3 not-for-profit company. And that came to fruition this past 60, 90 days. Currently running a Holidays for Heroes campaign. We're trying to get 100 active duty military home this year for Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, New Year's,
Wow.
Whatever we can do. So it's been amazing, the traction that we've gotten off of it already. Far surpassed anything I thought, and really thankful to my network and how they've been sharing the message. And right now, we're about 20 to 23 people funded for this year's season. So I think we'll nail the 100 is what I'm hoping.
What a great thing to be able to do. And you served as well, didn't you, Ed?
Yeah, I'm a 5-year Air Force veteran. Very fortunate in that I was in the military at a time where there were no conflicts or anything like that. So pretty much had an office job. But I've always had a special place for our active duty folks and our veterans. They don't make a lot of money. They put their lives on the line on a daily basis. And I saw this as an opportunity for me to give back in some way.
That's wonderful. I have a guest coming up in the podcast in a couple of weeks. His name is Jason Van Camp, and he wrote a book called Deliberate Discomfort. Write that down. It is, in my opinion, one of the top 5 books on leadership ever written. Awesome. You'll relate to it, having served in the military, but they do a really great job, Jason and his team, of applying what I'll call masterclass research and science behind each one of the examples in the book. So it's unusual. Sometimes you see a book of stories and it's a great story. They've given you really practical advice. And I think I'm going to connect the two of you because I think his company, Mission 60, would completely buy into what you're doing. So I'm happy to make that introduction afterwards. But I know you're a voracious reader. I think you'll enjoy the book, and I highly recommend it.
Awesome. It's going into my on-deck circle.
Perfect. So Ed, tell us a little bit, your background is varied, right? You've got some interesting educational experience. I wasn't aware of the community school that you went to for the Air Force, right? You got some engineering experience and a degree there, and then you went on to get some business education after that. Kind of tell us the thought process of, when you joined the military and decided to get an education, there was a 9-year gap between your engineering degree and your business degree. Walk me through kind of how that all transpired. It's fascinating.
Yeah, well, I will first off say that I have got to be one of the luckiest human beings on the face of the planet. And
Okay.
in a few minutes with that. So I joined the military in 1982.
Hmm.
Ronald Reagan had fired all the air traffic controllers. And in my 18-year-old cranium, was like, wow, Reagan fired all the air traffic controllers. I'm going to go in the military, learn how to be an air traffic controller, and I will have a job for life.
Sure.
So I get to basic and so cliche. Your recruiter lied to you. You can't be an air traffic controller. You wear glasses. How about we teach you? You got one of two choices. Door A is you can become a military police officer, which,
Okay.
hey, I've got a ton of respect for law enforcement, but it just as a job, a vocation did not, appeal to me.
Sure.
Second was you can learn how to fix computers. Well, I was just a dumb farm kid from Cornfield, Ohio. I'd never actually even seen a computer, but it sounded a lot better. I'm glad that I took that route. I spent about 5 years in the military and took a class or two at a time. I actually had credits from like 11 universities, but it took me 11 years total to get a bachelor's degree, one class, two classes at a time.
Wow.
Then I'd move and, making it up 30% of the credits that I just spent the last 2 years on wouldn't transfer. I think if I probably added up all the credits, I probably have a doctorate 3 times over. But finally I was able to get a 4-year degree. I think it was 31 or 32 at the time. Meanwhile, holding down full-time jobs, sales jobs, leadership jobs, and just grinding.
Yeah.
Kids.
How many kids do you have, Ed?
I got 2 kids. They're older. I've got a 32-year-old and a 30-year-old, so they're way off the radar as far as goes.
Well, there's not a lot of people that spend 11 years going to school. At least
And actually finish.
and finish. I went to college with a couple of guys that spent 7 or 8 years, but they weren't. They were still on campus. It's a little different experience. So what's by the way, it's totally understandable. You're thinking air traffic controller, and somebody throws MP in front of you. That's very, very different. How did the experience working with computers translate to your first jobs out of the military? What were the opportunities back in the 80s?
Yeah, again, I was so lucky. Right place, right time, right skill set. I ended up getting recruited by a company called Prime Computer. And for those of a certain age, remember them as a pretty large manufacturer of mid-range computing systems. And actually how I got my start in sales, I sort of call it lucky lightning bolt number 2 for me. About a year in, I'm watching all these salespeople coming out of the office, fancy clothes, beautiful cars, brand new houses. Didn't seem like they were working all that hard. I'm like, I want that life. So I bugged the sales manager, probably not as obnoxiously as every day, but it sure felt like that probably to him. And Prime had signed an OEM agreement, an OEM, sales agreement, distribution agreement with this little company in San Jose. They were $90 million at the time. They made this box called a bridge router that connected local area networks up with the internet. I think that sales manager thought he was throwing a bone at me just to make me go away, but it was the second biggest awesomeness, lucky strike for me in my career that could have happened. That little $90 million company was Cisco Systems.
Sure.
And literally, the sales skills required to be successful selling Cisco Systems at that time was, here's my fax number, get me the PO, I have 5 left. If you don't want them, the next person on the phone will take them. Do I have your order? That was it.
Those days don't happen anymore.
No, they don't. I'm sure maybe there's some stuff that's selling
sure.
out. But wow, it set me up though, because 10 years after that, I got involved in the software space, and I've been very lucky to have been affiliated with 6 actually companies that have gone from X to Y and had great exits either via public markets or private equity sale.
Well, that's great. If you can catch Cisco's tail at the beginning of it, you definitely had the ride of your life there.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you it taught me everything I needed to know about selling, but you literally, I've got 5 left. List price is $9,999. here's the fax number to send me your PO. Have a nice day.
There are some people that still think that's how sales works, but it's not.
No, not at all.
So Ed, let's, I'm going to jump into some of the things you've done recently in your career and bring a couple examples up. And then we'll get into, as you mentioned, you've got several moments where you've eaten some crow. And I think you've had a lot of diversity in your career. You're a well-respected leader. So I want to talk about the transition from an individual sales contributor to building teams and eventually running companies very successfully. So the story I'll share, and then you can kind of walk us back to how you arrived at this style. But I mentioned my wife, she worked in sales support at Dude Solutions, where you were CEO. And, when you joined the company, obviously fast growing business, taking it from where it was to, I think to the heights it is today, you were definitely involved with that scale, right? That's what you came in with the business. But what I was surprised at is the level of detail and the frequency of communication you did for every employee, right? So you put, and I don't know if it was weekly or monthly, but these emails were incredibly detailed, incredibly positive. You didn't glance over the challenges, right? If there was a challenge the business was facing, you brought it out, you highlighted it, said there's a plan, but it was always forward leaning. It was always taking the company forward. And her reaction, which, and by the way, you've probably heard this, but it's great when someone says, everyone around me that reads these emails is inspired. I think that's the ultimate form of leadership, if you can inspire people to perform. So where did you pick up this communication style, and how did you refine it?
Yeah, I wish I could say there was one, penultimate aha moment when it came to communications, but there wasn't. I like to say to people, I've never had an original idea of my own. I've usually just borrowed, good things that I've seen from other people and apply.
Yep.
I think, as an amalgamation of things I've read, podcasts, good leaders that I've come in contact with, a couple of sort of key themes popped out that I said, if I ever got myself into a spot where I am the person leading the company, I'm going to lean in on transparency. So, almost every number, there's some numbers you keep sensitive, but almost every number you can find, I'm going to broadcast it. I'm going to do board meeting reviews with any employee who wants to see the board deck. I'm going to write about what's happening in the company. I'm going to talk a lot. I'm going to have lots of meetings so that people can feel part of the mission, part of the decision-making process. They see the same data that I do. They might not always agree with what I ultimately do with that data or the decision I have to make. But at least, like most of the people would say, wow, okay, interesting. I see that. I see what he's doing. I'm not sure I'd do it that way, but I can understand how he got there. And you get a lot of buy-in, versus, I don't know what's happening. They just came up with this stupid, idiotic decision, and now I got to execute it. And so that's one facet. The other facet is, look, as a CEO, the tone at the top is the thread that gets pulled through to every employee, every level in the company.
Yeah.
And if I'm boring, if I am non-inclusive, if I'm not interesting to read, that's going to permeate the organization. And I didn't want to be associated with the idea that, they could fog a mirror over there on a Tuesday, but not on a Wednesday. So I was going to do it that way.
And, as you were, growing the organization, scale was challenging in hiring people at that pace, right? And making sure you got the right talent. So how did you balance speed, right? You got to get the people in butts and seats to get the work done, with making sure that the right people got in the seats. And tell us about any lessons you learned there.
Yeah, so I think the first lesson any leader could take and learn from is hire that next layer and make sure they are the next layer of your direct reports, and make sure that there are some common philosophies around what makes a great employee. What are some of the traits you look for? What are we not going to compromise on? What will we compromise on? and really multiply your own sort of standards on hiring to say your next layer of leadership. And they do the same, and they do the same, and they do the same. So when you're hiring a lot of people at a fast clip, I mean, there were some months we were hiring 30 people.
Yeah, that's a lot.
You got to count on your team, because you can't be the person interviewing every employee. I've seen people try to do that and they fail miserably. There's no way you can do it fast enough. So you have to replicate with that next layer of leadership and the next layer of leadership what you're expecting.
Yeah, it's true. Pushing the decision-making out to the edge is a really important part of leadership. Mm-hmm. When you think about leadership versus management, I've heard obviously this is one of the points of the podcast is leadership and entrepreneurship. Sure. I'm always fascinated by the comparison that you can manage products, you can manage things, but you lead people.
Yep.
And I agree with that. So when you're hiring key leaders in an organization, what are the things that you're looking for? And by the way, it's hard to do in an interview process, right? You can only learn so much. But when you're thinking about people that are going to take the style you're trying to get through the organization and propagate it through the whole company, what are the key things you're looking for?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of things. Obviously, mechanical competence for the job that they're being hired to do. Yeah. Like that's table stakes. You have to be able to do the job. Secondly, I look for broader shoulders than maybe the job that they're currently being hired for. Like every employer I'm looking for is like, wow, can Peter, throw a few more bricks on his back? And if not, that might be okay, but maybe not. High EQ is critical. I'm also looking for high character, looking for people that have learned that, doing things the right way might take longer, but you have a lot less to apologize for later than maybe taking some shortcuts that you wish you had back. So I think those are some of the things I look for. Intellectual curiosity. I don't know if you ever interviewed somebody where you get to the end and it's like, hey, I've done all the questions and talk and some of the talking here. Do you have any questions for me? And they just look at you like, no. Like,
so that's a red flag for me.
Oh, it's such a huge red flag. And, so those are some of the things I look for.
From an EQ standpoint, let's drill down there. To me, it's one of the biggest skills lacking in a lot of organizations. Mm-hmm. And EQ, EI, whatever you want to call it, right? For me, and I see it in your writing, and I see it the way you treat people, EQ involves a lot of different components. Empathy is a big thing, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. Understanding where the other person is coming from is really important, putting yourself in their shoes, and then taking a breath and recognizing there's a very key moment in how I communicate with this individual that's going to determine our relationship, quite frankly, for a long time. Yep. And if you can't, it's hard to recover from those moments. So the book I described earlier, Deliberate Discomfort, spends a lot of time on this, which I don't know that people realize the importance of these characteristics in the military and how important they can translate into the working world. Mm-hmm. Jason and his team made an interesting point. They said, look, our job is to not make you better, Ed. Our job is to make the person next to you better, right? That should be your goal. How do I make my teammate better? Because if I'm helping them improve through service, we all win. And that's a hard thing for some leaders to digest. So how do you first of all translate EQ on your own front, and then how do you pull it out of your team?
Yeah. So maybe a little bit of context. If you would have known me 15 years ago, 20 years ago, EQ and Ed, not said in the same breath.
Understood.
I was a jerk, quick to judge, unempathetic, driven for results to a point of fault. And as a result, I probably turned away a lot of good people for my management style. And, Eating Crow podcast, I think that's, when I came to that realization, it's like, wow, that's how I operate. And it wasn't until I went to the Center for Creative Leadership which is CCL is a pretty widely respected leadership training school, where I got feedback from people around me about my leadership style. I was ready to stop leading people. And luckily I worked for a CEO who, after getting back, and I basically said, I don't think I can do this for you anymore. And he just looked at me and was like, when we go to CCL, we all go through this. Did you learn something about yourself? And I said, yeah. And that is, I'm going to learn how to, I'm not even sure we used EQ back then, but the equivalent of whatever the term was, emotional quotient back then. And so, I've come a long way, and so much a long way that I actually forgot the darn question you asked me that set me on this path.
Well, you leaned into it, right? So I was trying to pull out the eating crow moment, and you just got to it, which is, how did you learn to imply that EQ or empathetic approach? And you described the fact that you got some feedback, informing you that you weren't leaning in that direction.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I've been to, so around the Research Triangle area is Bell Leadership. Mm-hmm. So my company did the same thing for us when I was a CEO. This is 15 years ago now. And same thing. By the way, you can't turn off the competitive nature, right? So they mentioned that Michael Jordan went through the program and he got a score of whatever this thing was, like a 90. I'm like, I'm going to get a 90. I got to get a 90. And
I can't beat him on the court. I'll beat him on this.
Oh, goodness gracious. There's no way. And I'm not even going to share what I got, but it wasn't a 90. And same thing, my team, you do a 360, right? And your team rates you in all these things. And what's really interesting is my perception of how I thought I was leading the team and my perception of their perception couldn't have been further from the truth.
Isn't it just stone cold killing when that happens?
It sucked, and I looked at them. I wanted to hug them all and say, I'm sorry. I had no idea. And it was great because all of us went. We did 360s on each other. And I think the only reason I got lucky is I subconsciously, that wasn't consciously, I had put people in place in my leadership team that addressed my weaknesses. Mm. So we were still highly functional, but I wasn't leading the way I needed to be leading. Mm. And so that was an eating crow moment for me as well, where I thought, geez, I gotta really change the way I listen and the way I respond. So when you came back, and fortunately you had a CEO that said, hey, look, Ed, we all learned this. What did you pick up? How did you adjust? How did you make that pivot?
Yeah, I think first off, I gathered the team of direct reports that had been so kind to give me that feedback. Mm-hmm. And, I sort of had a come to Jesus moment with them where I said I was sorry, and that I gave them permission and the right that if they saw me acting like that again, call me on it.
Yeah.
And, maybe not in a room full of 50 people, but,
sure.
But call me on it. And then if I react poorly, call me on that too. And so over time and experimenting and working with people and getting feedback, and also watching others commit the same mistakes or errors that I made and watching how people recover from those, I sort of honed where I'm at. But even I look back on my 3 years at Dude, there were a couple of times there where it's like, you doofus, really? Is that how you are? Is that who you are? Mm-hmm. Come on.
Yeah. Well, the fact that you're aware of it indicates that the training was successful and you rethought your process. It's when you're not aware of it that it really becomes a problem. So when you think specifically about one of the characteristics you mentioned was you were quick to judge. What practice did you put in place to slow your pace of judgment or to gather more information at any given time?
Yeah, I think there's probably a number of tools that I've used through the years. So first off, that 3-second pause before you open your mouth.
Yep.
Oh, so powerful. More Socratic questioning. Okay, Ed, don't assume that you know where this is going. Ask a few more questions. Sometimes you're right. Oftentimes you're not.
Yep.
Asking, just listening more, because I find, if somebody comes to you, especially if you're a CEO or COO or whatever, with a problem or a challenge, they come to you because either they're looking for validation. Hey, I've got an idea on how to fix this. Do you agree with me?
Mm-hmm.
Or they're totally stumped. And the last thing they want is to get a pie in the face because they ask you, hey, I got this puzzle. Dude, can you help me out? I've never seen this before. And the more that I've learned to, okay, interesting. How about, how did you think about this? What did you think about that? When did that occur? When you said X, what did they say Y? And what you end up doing by asking a lot of Socratic questions is you're actually training those people to say, wow, next time I see a problem like this, I remember, I went up in the CEO's office and here's what he did and here's the types of questions he asked. I'm going to do that next time and I'm going to learn. And that's how you train an executive team or leadership team to solve almost every problem before it hits your desk.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you can pass that kind of listening skills down to your team, then again, you spread out and distribute the decision-making process. When you think about, leading a very fast-paced, high-pressure organization, it's private equity backed, right? So growth is primary.
Growth and profitability.
Growth, and by the way, sometimes they don't have the same objectives, and sometimes they ask you to do both, which is really hard, right?
Yeah.
There's companies that can grow, but doing it profitably is a bigger challenge.
Yeah.
So, tell us about your experience in a sales-focused role. Then you moved into leadership roles, and then eventually to the dude. What's the way to get people to rally around that tension to drive growth and still profitability? Because what happens is you start to push people to capacity before you add another resource.
Yeah.
What's your gut on making those decisions, and how did you get people to buy into the concept?
Yeah, so I've learned a lot in that area. I've also learned what doesn't work, and where I got to at the dude is I had a unique opportunity when the company was sold from one private equity firm to another private equity firm, and I made a case and a conscious decision that the top 60 leaders in the organization, which was not where we were before, would all get meaningful option grants. And as part of that, it wasn't just some paper, I would have monthly ownership meetings with the option holders where we would go through almost our monthly business report that we'd show to the board. We'd talk about issues. I'd talk about where we were stuck as an org, what I needed them to do to help. And for that set of leaders, they felt like part of the decision-making process because they truly were treated like owners. They were getting the same bits of data and all of that as the ownership team. I think where it gets harder is when you get into the rank and file where you're just simply unable because of cap tables and things like that.
Sure.
Just equity around. And I would say I would give myself a C+, maybe a B- for this as CEO, but really trying to help them understand, hey, you might think you're an accounts payable clerk, but let me show you how that actually impacts the mission and how our clients need you 24/7, figuratively speaking, and why what you do is matters, and I use that analogy. I think I heard it back many years ago. The space shuttle, one of the space shuttle missions had to have been scrubbed for the lack of a 10-cent washer on a part. And I always try to make that translation to some of maybe the less glamorous positions with folks that, hey, you're pretty damn critical. That 10-cent washer, you might think you're that 10-cent washer, but you're actually going to hold the shuttle on the ground. Because
Darn right.
Yeah.
Darn right. Yeah, that's true. And getting people to understand their role in the team. I love the idea of getting, the key leaders in the organization bought in as owners.
Yeah.
It changes the way they get to the team, and they'll lead their teams differently.
Yeah. And I would call the meeting monthly ownership meeting. And I would, call them fellow owners, and invites and things like that.
Did you get resistance from the PE firm to do that initially?
No.
That's great.
They scratched their heads like, well, we haven't seen that done before, but I guess it's harmless. It's like We're seeing the numbers. We're just, they're getting options. We want them to be, especially for the huge lift that we have to do,
Mm-hmm.
we want them thinking like owners every day.
Right. When you, now you're calling from California, right? Is that where you're home now? Got it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about taking that into your next passion, which is Holidays for Heroes, how have you been able to identify people to help fund this effort? Is it organic, or are you doing a lot more outreach?
First off, I'm very fortunate. I have about a 7,000 connection LinkedIn network.
Sure.
A lot of these people know me from the past 5 or 6 companies, and so I've been putting stuff out on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, and you've seen some of it.
Yeah.
Usually just a picture of the candidate, where they're going to or coming from, and if we're close to funding. And I've been so grateful because the network is taking care of those people. And like I said earlier, we're probably 23 trips funded right now, and we've only been in business technically for a month and 12 days, 13 days.
If you think about helping someone who might be listening to this podcast, considering a nonprofit role,
Mm-hmm.
is this your first nonprofit role, Ed? Is it something you gravitated into?
It is. It's my first nonprofit role, although I would say tangentially, I was the SVP of Sales and Worldwide Operations at Blackbaud, which is a software provider out of Charleston, South Carolina, that fuels and powers not-for-profits. So I had a little bit of that in my background.
Yeah, Blackbaud's a really successful organization. We're a big part of that. What are you finding about and by the way, every nonprofit has their own mission.
Yeah.
But what are you finding that you can apply from your prior experience, and what are you learning that's new?
Yeah, interesting. I haven't thought about that yet, but I think what I've been able to apply so far is consistent and positive communications, which is really what you want to get out there when you're trying to get people's minds and hearts wrapped around a mission.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's probably something. I think what I probably underestimated is there's a lot of noise out there, and you really have to figure out a way to blow the trumpet loud and uniquely, because there's a million other people out there trying to get other people's attention. So I think that's been interesting. I would also say I've been lucky in that the network that I built via business through LinkedIn and whether it's a company role or a board role or what have you, that network pre-existed, and it's taken care of getting these people home.
It is so critical. A funny story. My dad hit me up on LinkedIn 20 plus years ago. And my dad is not a social media guy. I think he was working at Johnson Controls at the time, and I think someone pinged him with a message on LinkedIn. I don't know if he even consciously knew he invited me.
Oh, wow.
And, at the time I'm trying to think what I was doing at the time. And I said, I got no time for this thing. So I said no to my dad.
Oh my gosh.
on LinkedIn. My dad was way ahead of the curve. I think about the network he would have had and I would have had if I had done this thing 20 plus years ago.
20 years ago, the thing was in its infancy.
It was in its infancies. In fact, I'd never even heard of it. That's how, and I was theoretically with it. I was a software guy, and here's my dad. And my dad, to this day, has no social media channels whatsoever. It scares he and my mother to death. When we get him on a FaceTime, I think they think something evil's happening. Right?
No, it's funny how people run the gamut on that. Yeah.
But it's an important lesson, I think, when you're looking at networking and with a sales background like you have, and obviously getting back into fundraising, LinkedIn is such a powerful tool.
Huge.
It is. It's how this podcast is growing, and it's how I'm identifying people I'd like to have on the podcast because and by the way, it takes work. It's just like anything else. You have to mine it, you have to build it, and you have to treat those people with respect, and you have to put something out there that is viable content in order for people to take you seriously. But if you've done that like you did, and you got a network of 7,000 people, and my point is you're enabling the next phase of your career because of the work you've put in for the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. I don't take that for granted one bit. And, it is what you just said there is so true, that you have to put content out there that people care about or learn something from or are entertained by. And, LinkedIn, huge props to them. You look at every other social media platform and yikes, it's a cesspool in so many ways. LinkedIn seems to be a bit of a self-cleaning oven because it's mostly mature
Bingo.
professionals, and they shut people down by ignoring them if they're putting crap out there.
That's exactly right. It is self-policing because people want to keep it somewhat business pure, and there are people trying to game it every day. Believe me, that stuff happens. But one of the last points I want to bring up on the podcast is how you use LinkedIn at the Dude during the initial COVID issues, right? So you were really frequent, I think, internally, but also externally. So as a leader in an organization going through the same things you were considering, I often shared your posts or used material from your posts with our team, like, hey, look, there's no playbook here, right? Communication's the key. That was one of your key messages. You have to keep communicating with your people. But also, you hit on this earlier, it was a bit of a calming effect, right? So when people heard from you, it removes the questions that spin them up, right? Yeah. So tell me about, I believe the reactions inside the Dude were positive. What reactions did you get from the rest of the community about those posts?
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. I got plenty of positivity around how we handled the external communications as well as internal communications, both with COVID and with some of the civil unrest and all of that.
Yes.
And I coined 4 C's as an acronym at the beginning of this, and I feel like I'm going to forget one of the C's for some wild reason, but communicative, calm, compassionate, and I think there was one more, but I can't remember what it was right now. But we had decks. We rolled out the 4 C's to the leadership team. We talked about them internally. I externally focused it. Asked for feedback from other corporate leaders on what they were doing. I admitted, internally as well as externally, like, look, they don't train you for this anywhere. None of us have seen this one before. No. And anybody that is telling you they know exactly what to do, run, because they don't know what they're doing.
No.
And it resonated, and we got the team through. I think it did calm people in a sense, and subsequent challenges that the states have had around some of the civil unrest issues. Same thing, like, look, let's just be honest. This is uncharted water. Mm-hmm. We're here. We're going to plow through. We're going to be consistent, and we're not going to do anything silly.
Yeah, and I think during that period of time, a lot of organizations had to restructure their companies, do some downsizing. The Dude was no different. The way you communicated that announcement was one of the more particular posts that stood out to me. That same day you put out a post, you recognized the people that, were affected. And it was genuine. It was a compassion message that said, hey, look, this is not something we want to do, but, we had to do, and we care about you. And I'm guessing that most of the people that were affected understood. They may not be happy. It didn't make it easy, but I think they recognized where the company was coming from.
Yeah, no, I think well said. Most gut-wrenching decision I have ever had to make as a professional. Mm-hmm. Hated every second of it. Did the best we could to take care of people on the way out.
Yep.
Communicated as thoughtfully and compassionately as we could. And we actually got a few of those folks back during my tenure there. But I do think the way we handled it, people might have said, look, I hate that they had to do this, but they weren't jerks about it. And they were open about why and all that. And had to do it, but it sucked.
Well, one of the things that, in addition, that you did well was you communicated what you knew at the time. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of leaders are waiting for all of the information, and that wait causes people to drive up their anxiety level because they don't know either. So saying, hey, here's the plan for today based on the information we have in front of us. Here's our goal. that may change. New data comes in, we got to make an adjustment, but we're going to course correct as necessary, but at least we're going to be open about it.
Yeah, very well said. It was exactly how we versed some of the communications. Like, look, here's the best I can do. Can't guarantee 90 days from now or 180 days from now, things won't be different, but right now this is the best we can do.
So Ed, as you get, by the way, you're in prime time for Holidays for Heroes, right? This is it's like tax season for you, right? I mean,
it sure is.
As you get through this, what's next? Do you think you'll double down on this as a nonprofit, or are you going to jump back into another for-profit role? What are you thinking at this point?
Yeah, so where I'm at right now is I want to give Holidays for Heroes, at least for this season. I want to give it, as much as I can give it, and then pick my head up afterwards and figure out what the next version of that is. I was recently named to a board of director role for another software company. I have another one or two that I'm currently working on. I don't think at the moment that I'm going to go back into sort of 70-hour-a-week CEO-dom.
Right.
We got a few other things. I got a second book coming out at Thanksgiving. You got the holidays stuff going on. So right now, between board work, holidays, painting fences out here on my property, I'm a pretty busy guy.
Well, any company would be glad to have you, but I think your cause, at least in the short term, has a really big impact, and it's great to see that people that give so much for our country have an opportunity to come home, and I know I speak for anybody that's been impacted. They're very grateful. So.
Yeah, thanks. We're seeing it, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, when you link up a person trying to get home with a plane ticket, there's joy there.
There is certainly joy there. Well, Ed, it's been great hearing your Eating Crow moments, and I appreciate you opening up about that. It's not very often a leader says, "Hey, here's where I was stumbling, but here's how I got myself back up." So we appreciate having in the podcast. When you get your next book out, let me know. We'll get that out and publicize that for you as well.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Enjoy it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thanks for checking out Eating Crow here on YouTube. Drop a like and subscribe so you never miss a video.